Hello, welcome back to Uncanny Oddities, Season 4, Episode 5 tonight. We're going to be talking about interdimensional beings, ranging from everything from aliens to Bigfoot, fairies, and a little bit of everything in between, including Djinn. I've been reading up on a lot of stuff, not detailed, but like casually. I've been casually researching some stuff lately over the last, few years. And I feel like this would be a good time to bring it all together because I've heard some stories about Jinn that relate to time travel and the multiverse. And I've heard about Bigfoot can potentially travel through, the interdimensional areas. And that's why they say that, some stories have Bigfoot that just seemingly disappear out of nowhere. And maybe that's one reason why Bigfoot is so hard to find or get evidence of, because maybe they know when they're about to, pass away. And maybe they go off into a cave somewhere in another dimension, and that would also explain why people see some strange, forest materials and flowers and trees and stuff. Like, I've even heard stories of park rangers, like, that should know their stuff about the forest, right? And even park rangers and stuff will sometimes have stories about like going through a forest area, and suddenly all of a sudden they're in a different area and they don't hear any wildlife, and there's all these trees and everything else that they don't recognize. But let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing is we're just basically going to talk about, interdimensional beings in general, like what it is. And, it's pretty self-explanatory. They're beings that can travel between multiple dimensions. Now, the way they do this is different for different creatures. For example, I've heard that aliens, some people believe that aliens are multi-dimensional beings or interdimensional beings, and some people think that's why they can abduct people like through their ceilings, and sometimes they have stories about aliens that like go through walls and stuff. And they say that what they do is they exit our dimension, go into another dimension, go through the wall, the door, whatever solid object, and then reappear back in our dimension. So there's some very interesting, stories about all this that we've got going for us tonight. So the first one we're going to get started with is going to be aliens, as I just, kind of briefly scratched the surface of. So there's the idea that aliens can, and their UFOs themselves, are interdimensional travelers. And basically, we typically believe that aliens come from, outer space, another galaxy, another planet, something like that. But what if they don't? Because there have been many stories about aliens over the years that have, talked about all this stuff. And it's just very interesting to me because they have so many different aspects with other creatures that share everything. But the aliens might be not outer space, they might be hiding with inner space. Now, some people say the gray aliens or UAP craft interact with our world in ways that don't make any sense, such as, they have stories of alien saucers traveling through solid objects like mountains and going into mountains and disappearing without crashing. And that makes me wonder, maybe some of our mountains and hills and stuff like that, maybe they're not as completely solid as we think they are. What if some of these mountains that, and especially in like, highly restricted military government areas where they don't let you go, like maybe something out in Area 51, if you've ever heard of the M cave, that's a very interesting one. Uh, but maybe some of these mountains and stuff are holograms, because we have very, very good hologram technology these days. So I've started to wonder if maybe everything that we think we see, maybe it's not all really there. Maybe it's like a video game, and the draw distance might be pretty far, but there's no need to draw the insides of a building if the player isn't anywhere near that building. You get what I'm saying? Now, there are some different types of things that we can get into here. So, one thing I wanted to dig into was, let me see what I got here. I got some notes pulled up here. So, this says that there is something known as the control system and historical continuity. A central pillar of this theory, championed by Jacques Vallée, is the concept of UAPs as a control system. Vallée argues that these phenomena are not merely random visitors, but a mechanism that has influenced human evolution, culture, and belief systems throughout history. Now, what's interesting about this is what if, and this is my own personal theory here, but what if everything that we've had throughout history, all these different religions, from Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Hinduism, all these religions, there's one thing that has stood out to me above all else. They have slightly different names and they do have slightly varied belief systems based on their cultures and their geographical locations, but there are a few things that seem pretty unanimous across all religions from what I've seen. From what I've seen, it would appear to me that every single religion in existence, correct me if I'm wrong, I would love to be wrong, has a story about some sort of global cataclysmic flood that was caused or created by some sort of god, whether it be Inky and Enlil with the Anunnaki, God with Christianity, or, whatever else. And then they have this person in Christianity. We have Noah. In other religions, we have Muhammad or, any other belief systems out there. There's always a flood that was created because the god got angry because of the way that the humans were treating each other and treating the planet. And not just that, but also because the humans learned too much. That's one thing that I've always found. It always feels like one of the biggest problems is learning too much. And that why is that always seen as a bad thing, I wonder. But I've come to the conclusion that maybe it's not the knowledge that is a problem. Maybe it's how we use the knowledge. And you've seen the atomic bomb. You've seen Agent Orange, like the ripping of Nanking in Japan. They're globally, the Nazis in Germany. Sorry if YouTube gets upset with that word, but I'm just calling them what they were. And whatever. If they, get upset about that, all the bad stuff. What I'm trying to say is every time humanity has gained knowledge or power, they have always used it to further evil goals. In my personal opinion, it feels like humans have always ignored the dangers and rather than asking, should we, only asks, can we, and proceeds to do something that is incredibly dangerous and more often than not gets many people killed. And they seem to value power, money, and war above all else. But I'm getting off my soapbox on that one. So, anyways, there are a few different types of interdimensional beings. Such as the Djinn, which we're going to get into here in a minute. But there is also something known as the avatar mechanism and frequency. If these beings, aliens, UAPs, whatever, exist in higher dimensions, such as a fifth dimension, they cannot directly interact with our 3D reality without a medium, much like a human cannot breathe underwater without a suit, or a human cannot exist without their soul, which weighs 21 grams, scientifically proven. They haven't proven that it's the soul necessarily. They still argue that. That's still up for debate. But they have scientifically proven that there is something exactly 21 grams that leaves our body upon the moment of death. And it is not the bowels. They already accounted for that. So, you can call it what you will, but there's something in our body that leaves at death. Now, getting back to our story over here. Mediums. A spirit needs a body is a vessel. The body is just the vessel. The spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, there's some sort of life force that makes this, work, move around, operate. Now, there's avatars and probes. This theory suggests that the physical aliens, such as the Greys, and their craft are theorized to be biological or mechanical avatars. Now, before we go deeper into this, biological avatars, if you saw the movie Nope, where they had aliens hiding out in the clouds, but not hiding in the clouds, they were the clouds. They had in the movie Nope, spoiler alert, sorry if you haven't seen it, but the main idea of the movie is that there is an alien hiding in the clouds, but then they find out it's not a UFO hiding in the clouds. The cloud itself is a biological conscious entity that feasts on humans and horses. And wow, I'm not even going to deny it. I actually thought that movie looked really, really stupid in the trailers. Okay? Seriously. But what was really awesome about that, though, is that after I actually saw the movie, I saw how they turned the cloud into the alien, and that got me thinking. Like I said in our episode the other day, I was like, we're not looking at this right. We always assume that aliens are going to be just like us, very human like. But for all we know, a bolt of lightning could be a life form. uh the tiniest of germs are technically considered life forms. Who's to say that there couldn't be such a thing as a conscious cloud life form? And we have no idea what aliens are like, supposedly, because we supposedly have never seen any aliens in real life, supposedly. So if we don't know what we're looking for, how exactly are we looking for it? That's always been one thing I've always found very strange. And so some other ideas is, who's to say an ice cube couldn't be an alien? I mean, I know that sounds insane, but they're aliens. We don't understand them. That's the point. That's why we call them aliens. Like, I think we have too much human ego in our bodies and in our minds to properly think about what is technically considered a life form. I think the definition of life forms should be expanded. And I definitely believe, personally, as far as the Fermi paradox is concerned, I think it boils down to two things. A, like we said the other day, we simply don't have the technology and they're hiding from us. And B, we're not even looking for all the kinds of things that could potentially be considered life forms. Now, to continue. Uh, but the UFOs and the aliens are remote controlled or semi autonomous constructs designed to operate within our specific physical laws, according to this theory that we're talking about here, the avatar mechanism and frequency. The true entity remains in the higher dimension, piloting the avatar or receiving data from it, similar to how humans use deep sea rovers to explore the ocean floor. Now, I am a big, big fan of frequency. It was actually my awakening when we started talking about sacred geometry and, the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence and all that stuff a while back. That's what opened my mind and taught me how important all this stuff truly is. So, the frequency and vibration aspect of this. Drawing from both string theory and metaphysical traditions, this model suggests that different dimensions vibrate at different frequencies. Okay? And I don't know if how chronically online any of you all are, but I have a problem. I fully admit that, and I'm trying to work on that. I'm actually trying to work on that and be less chronically online. But anyways, there is something going around right now where there are a lot of people on social media talking about frequencies and timeline shifts. And they say that the way you shift into the new timeline is by altering your frequency with your mind. And this delves into some very esoteric beliefs and gets really deep, but that's not the point. I just wanted to bring that up very quickly because it's interesting to me that they're all talking about that, because this right here says UAPs may tune their frequency to become visible or tangible to us, which is the materialization, and then shift back their frequency to become invisible, which is the dematerialization. So maybe they have mastered their minds to the point where they can shift their frequency to walk through our walls or shift in and out of being visible. And this explains why they often appear on radar, but not visually, or vice versa, and why they seem to phase through solid objects, such as mountains and, walls on people's homes and stuff. And supposedly, I've heard some stories that they can even affect your frequency, like I said earlier, when they abduct you and bring you through the wall or the ceiling into their UFO. Some people believe that they can shift your frequency long enough to bring you into their dimension, which I find very, very fascinating because honestly, I'm kind of tired of this dimension. I would like to travel to one of the higher dimensions because I don't I don't have very many people here that I relate to. But the key distinctions, to summarize, is the extraterrestrial versus interdimensional hypothesis. Extraterrestrial believe they were from distant planets in our universe. Interdimensional suggests that they are parallel dimensions or higher densities co-located next to us. Like as above, so below. That kind of idea. Now, the travel method. The extraterrestrials use physical propulsion across space, which requires immense time and energy, and as of right now, we do not currently have that level of technology. Many people believe it to be science fiction. Or interdimensional hypothesis suggests that they could use phase shifting, tunneling, or moving through the bulk or the ether, perhaps, which would be instantaneous, no matter where they are. Now, the nature of the craft. Extraterrestrial hypothesis suggests they are physical vehicles made of matter, perhaps with some sort of resonance lock, where the vehicle will only unlock if you have the proper frequency. Now, the interdimensional hypothesis, and honestly, I'm kind of leaning more towards aliens being interdimensional. But this one suggests that they are projections, avatars, or semi material manifestations. For the historical presence, the extraterrestrial hypothesis says only since humans became technological or recently, aka since the 50s. Now, the interdimensional hypothesis says they are eternal, appearing throughout history as myths or gods. Now, let me dig into that for a minute. I'm going to try not to spend too long, but this is one theory that I really, really, really love. The theory that maybe all the religions throughout history have been true, every single one of them. But what happened is maybe these religions were based on people at the time trying their best to describe alien encounters. And then over time, eventually we got to a point where the aliens abandoned everybody. That's why a lot of people don't believe in religion anymore, because they don't see the evidence, they don't see the signs. And, all this stuff happened so long ago and sounds so wild, and, you know, some of it sounds, you know, unbelievable, for lack of a better word. But what would make it believable? If it was advanced technology. Like, I think about this a lot, and I'm like, look, if I took something like a cell phone or a flash drive or even an earbud, something that seems a video game controller, something that seems so simple to us, if we took that back, even just like a few hundred years, even, or 1,000 years, just 1,000 years back in history, if we had a cell phone 1,000 years ago, or a mouse, or literally any piece of technology that we have today, we could easily convince those people that we were gods, and we could easily perform what they would consider miracles. So, what I'm wondering is, what if that's what happened? What if all the religions were originally formed based on things that were, actually happening, alien encounters? And then what happened afterwards is the aliens, they stopped visiting us, but people found their holy books, the books that were talking about the alien encounters or the gods, and they believed it because they didn't understand and they thought that it was true. And not just that, but then here's where it gets kind of sad and kind of dark in this theory of mine. What if some of the people that found the holy books, the religious texts, what if they weren't originally intended as religion? What if they were initially just records of things that were happening, and then someone saw the records and they were evil, obviously, and they decided, hey, these are some very fantastical stories here. We could use these, slightly alter them, and use them as a form of mind control to brainwash the masses so that they don't look for the truth, so that they don't expand their mind, shift their frequency, and evolve their consciousness. And that's one that I've been sitting with for a long time now. And it, I don't know how else to say it, but it feels right to me that there is some truth to religion. I personally do not consider myself to be religious, and I have been, very anti-religion in the past. I fully admit that. But I've started to come around, and as wild as this sounds, I do I would technically consider myself a form of Christian these days. But it's definitely very different than what you would normally consider. I'm a big believer in the electric universe theory as well, as I said last time. But you know what? That's enough about aliens. We're bored with that one. Let's move on. Next up, what have we got next? Okay, so next up is Bigfoot. This is the one we've been waiting for, James. This is the one you've been waiting for. It's just a small part, but I promise I'll get you a full Bigfoot episode soon. I just need to do some more research. So, the interdimensional Bigfoot theory proposes that Sasquatch is not a biological species, but a non physical or higher dimensional entity that can manipulate space to evade detection. Proponents argue this explains the lack of physical evidence. Like I said earlier, they might just go hide in a cave in another dimension when they're getting ready to die, such as bones or clear photos, because they say even if these creatures were dying, surely they would leave bones or something, right? Unless they left their bones in another dimension, and anecdotal accounts of Bigfoot disappearing into thin air or tracks ending abruptly. And thank you, James, and I have heard stories of Bigfoot in all sorts of wild situations. One that really stood out in my mind that I remember is a few months ago, I heard a story from a YouTuber uh, about this Bigfoot, and these people were going camping. They went to a cabin and they were resting at night. And then when they were resting at night, they started hearing like tapping on their windows, like tap 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 tap. And they looked out, and there was like a whole crew, like 4 or 5 Bigfoot, like throwing little pebbles at their window to try to get their attention. And they looked out and they were like, "What's going on?" And they got scared and they like opened their door, and they were going to go out and confront the Bigfoot. And they got scared and they grabbed their guns, they opened their door, and then nothing. They were gone. All the Bigfoot were gone. And so one theory that was proposed is they thought maybe the Bigfoot might have been interdimensional, traveled through a portal, and ran away. But that was one that I found very exciting. I don't know if it was, just like a creepy pasta or if it was something that he said actually happened to him. I don't know because he's a very good storyteller and he does a very good job of that suspension of disbelief. So I don't remember if he said that actually happened to him or if it was just a story, but either way, it really stood out to me and I thought it was a very exciting one. So, the key aspects of the interdimensional Bigfoot theory have three parts: slipwalking, which is a concept where Bigfoot is believed to possess the ability to move between parallel dimensions or slip through thin spots in reality, allowing them to remain hidden from human observation. Now, after all the stories I've read, I can believe in this one. I can actually believe in this one because it would explain a lot. And yes, I know a lot most I know a lot of people believe that Bigfoot is a hoax. But and yes, I know there have been a lot of stuff that's proven to be hoaxes, but it just feels to me like there have been far too many sightings for it to just be a simple hoax because there have been like hundreds of thousands of sightings, like if not more. I don't know. I haven't actually looked at the numbers, but there's been lots of sightings, and I'm just like, why would there be so many sightings if there wasn't something true about it? Like are there really that many people just going around and pranking people like that, like so efficiently to get that many stories? I don't know. I think there's something else going on here. Now, there's also a high strangeness correlation. Believers often link Bigfoot sightings to UFO phenomena, citing reports of orbs, strange lights, and sudden environmental changes like unnatural silence that accompany hunter encounters. And I have heard a few stories about people that talk about seeing UFOs and all that stuff as well around UFO encounters and Bigfoot encounters, like at the same time. So that's interesting to note. Now, alternative explanations. Some variations suggest Bigfoot are aliens, spirit beings, or wilded wilderness geists. That I don't think I've ever seen that word before, but they say it's a poltergeist-like entities, with some claims that they are smarter than humans and actively avoid contact. Well, that's not very difficult. There's lots of things that are smarter than humans. Humans are not that smart. But anyways, now, as for the skepticism and scientific view, critics, including skeptics and researchers like Sharon A. Hill, dismiss the theory as a logical fallacy known as an interdimensional excuse. They argue that claiming Bigfoot exists but is undetectable because they are interdimensional is unfalsifiable narrative used to explain away the complete absence of scientific evidence. But see, the thing about something being unfalsifiable is it's unfalsifiable. You can't prove it's not true. So, you know, can't really argue with that. Mainstream cryptozoology and biology favor the hypothesis that Bigfoot is either an undiscovered terrestrial primate, such as a relative of Gigantopithecus, or a mythological construct rather than a paranormal entity. But it goes deeper than that, and it says right here, it draws heavily from the work of researcher John Keel, who introduced the concept of ultra-terrestrials. He argued that phenomena like UFOs, ghosts, and cryptids, including Bigfoot, are not extraterrestrial visitors, but shape-shifting intelligences from a super spectrum or parallel dimension that overlaps our own. These entities can manipulate human perception and manifest physically at will. Now that sounds pretty interesting. So there is actually, so it sounds almost like a tulpa. I like tulpas. So some people apparently believe that Bigfoot might be a tulpa. I like that. The and if you haven't heard of a tulpa, it is essentially something that exists because people believe in it, like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, something like that. But those are silly examples, obviously. But no, you get the point. A tulpa is something that was created with pure thought energy alone and turned into a physical form from many people focusing very intently. The last time I heard of a tulpa actually coming into creation was a friar who had 30 monks focusing on the idea, and these are monks like trained for decades of meditation. So, their mental fortitude is probably a bit stronger than the average person, I would assume, you know. But anyways, so let's go ahead and get into the next thing, which is Djinn. So the term for Djinn in physics specifically describes a bootstrap paradox, a causal loop where an object or piece of information exists without a distinct origin. This terminology was formally introduced in a 1992 paper by physicists Andrei Losev and Igor Novikov titled The Djinn of the Time Machine: Non-Trivial, Self-Consistent Solutions. And to get a little bit further into this before we actually start reading it, basically what they're suggesting is that Jinn can not travel back in time themselves, but they can place an object back in history, which could have potentially led to the Mandela effect. Yeah, that's right. I actually discovered the idea of Jinn being interdimensional beings while I was researching the Mandela effect. Wild correlation right there, guys. Wild correlation. So here's the thing. Jinn of the first kind, uh, there are two types, and the first kind is known as physical objects trapped in a closed time-like curve. A classic example is the pocket watch in the film Somewhere in Time, which is passed from an older woman to a young man who travels back in time to give it to her younger self. The watch is never manufactured; it simply exists in an eternal loop, aging and being repaired to maintain consistency. So I think the way it's wording it, it almost sounds like they're saying that Jin is not something that sends the item back in time so much as it actually is the item in the first kind. That's the first kind. Now, the second kind, information loops. The most cited example is the song Johnny Be Good in Back to the Future. Marty McFly plays the song in 1955, inspiring Chuck Berry to write it. The song has no original composer. It exists solely because it travels back in time to inspire its own creation. Now, that is very, very interesting how it could travel back in time to inspire its own creation. That is what I love so much about this, because it's like there's no answer, but it is the answer. The answer is that there is no answer, and that there is no answer is the answer. Like, I love the logical fallacy of it. Now, for physical consistency and entropy, a major criticism of Jenn's is the second law of thermodynamics, which dictates that entropy must increase over time. See, humans, they don't age because there is no such thing as time. They entropy. If an object loops infinitely, it should theoretically degrade until it ceases to exist. But wait, until it ceases to exist, doesn't the law of conservation of energy say that matter cannot be created nor destroyed? So technically, everything that involves matter is immortal, including humans. I mean, according to science, we change into a different form of energy at the end, but something continues. Now, Losev and Novikov argued that a Djinn is not a closed system. It interacts with its environment during each loop. Through these interactions, such as being repaired or absorbing energy, the object can regain the entropy it lost, allowing it to remain identical at every point in the loop and satisfy the Novikov self-consistency principle. Now, here's where we get into the interdimensional aspect of Djinn. While the physics concept is a metaphor for causal loops, the mythological Djinn are increasingly interpreted in fringe science and ufology as interdimensional beings rather than supernatural spirits, such as how they were presented back in the day in the early 2000s in the TV show Supernatural. They were presented as physical creatures that needed to feast on the blood of humans, but the more fear that those humans had, the better their blood would taste. So what they did is they would hook people up. They would grant your wish, sure, but your wish was only granted in your mind while you slipped into a coma and they feasted on your blood. The more you know. Now, the interdimensional hypothesis comes from prominent ufologists like Jacques Vallée and John Keel, who suggest that Djinn, fairies, and modern UFO entities are the same phenomenon manifesting across different eras. This interdimensional UFO hypothesis suggests that these beings inhabit a parallel reality or a world of similitude in Alam I Mythal in Islamic mysticism that intersects with our own, and they can also manipulate the space time continuum. So, in that aspect, it says unlike extraterrestrials who travel vast physical distances, interdimensional beings appear to step through dimensions. This explains their alleged ability to materialize, dematerialize, and manipulate time, mirroring the leaving no trace attribute that inspired the physics term. Now, there is also something that they call ultra terrestrials, which was termed by John Keel, suggesting they are not biological aliens, but consciousness based entities capable of shaping reality and perception, effectively acting as the authors of the causal loops described in physics. That's the one I like. I like ultra terrestrials. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. Who's to say they can't be interdimensional ultra terrestrials? Now we're getting somewhere. Now, the last part says that the convergence of these ideas suggests a bridge between ancient mythology and theoretical physics. If the universe allows for closed time like curves, as general relativity permits, the Djinn of myth could be interpreted as entities capable of navigating these loops. In this view, the Djinn particle, I'm going to dig deeper into that here in just a second, is not just a metaphor for a stuck object, but potentially a descriptor for the mechanism these beings use to traverse the hula hoop of space time, existing outside linear time while influencing our physical reality. So that is very interesting to me. Because Jinn, we all know Genie from Aladdin, but this version of Jinn is is very intriguing because it mixes both like mysticism and science into one. Now, real quickly, this Djinn particle, the concept of a Djinn particle is a theoretical idea that arises in discussions about time travel and bootstrap paradoxes. It refers to an object or phenomenon that appears to have no origin or cause, existing in a closed loop where it is both the cause and the effect of itself. Okay, so it's basically just the first type of Jinn that they were talking about. Okay. Next up, we have um aeons from Gnostic beliefs. Now, this one was actually intriguing to me because aeons were something that I first discovered back in the Final Fantasy video games. And back in the day, I was just like, oh, that's a cool name for, the little monsters that you can summon in the game. But then I started digging into religions and I found Gnosticism, and it has these things called aeons. And in the Gnostic belief system, aeons are divine, immaterial emanations from the supreme, unknowable Godhead, often called the monad, Bethos, or one, that collectively constitutes the pleroma, or a realm of divine fullness. And this is where we get into the interdimensional stuff right here. So, unlike Orthodox creation ex nihilo, Gnostic cosmology relies on emanationism, where these beings represent progressive manifestations of divine attributes like mind, truth, and wisdom. In the influential Valentinian system, there are typically 30 aeons organized into 15 male female pairs known as syzygies. Syzygies. That's a fun word. Syzygies. And it is structured into an ogdode, decad, and dodecad. The cosmic drama begins when the final aeon, Sophia, the aeon of wisdom, acts without her partner. Yeah, she got a little cocky, but hey, can you blame her? She didn't want to wait around. She wanted to get stuff done, you know? But anyways, this resulted in the creation of the flawed material world we call Earth and the demiurge known as Yaldabaoth, who is distinct from the supreme god and rules the physical realm. And this is the belief that I apologize and I promise I'm not trying to offend anyone. This is the belief system. They believe that what is known as God in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, is a false entity known as the demiurge, who is not the true God, but they still do believe in the true God as described in the Bible. However, they simply call him the monad or the one, and they believe that he is in a different realm known as the pleroma, whereas the demiurge manipulated humanity and deceives them and keeps them trapped in this prison planet that we call Earth. The key distinctions is that in nature, aeons are timeless, incorporeal beings of light, serving as intermediaries between the transcendent God and the material world. So, in Gnostic beliefs, the aeons are essentially the angels, and the archons are essentially the demons. And they basically believe that the person in the Garden of Eden that was claiming to be God was a false God, but the true God is out there. He just is in a different dimension. Now, the role of the aeons is to facilitate the transmission of gnosis, or spiritual knowledge, which the Gnostics believe is necessary for human salvation and return to the pleroma. Now, in contrast, they are distinct from archons, which, as I said, are basically the demons of Gnostic beliefs, and they are the tyrannical rulers of the material universe, where we're at now, and are not considered separate gods, but facets of the singular divine essence. So basically, what they're saying is even the evil stuff, even the stuff that we don't like, that we are trying to, fight against, we still have to accept its existence, because without evil, we wouldn't know what good was. And without good, we wouldn't know how chaotic evil can be. We need both in order to appreciate either one. And here's the part where it gets a little disappointing. The fall of Sophia and the demiurge. The cosmic drama of Gnosticism centers on the final aeon, Sophia. Unlike the other aeons who emanate in perfect harmony with their consorts, sorry, having some trouble speaking apparently, Sophia attempts to emanate alone, driven by passionate desire to comprehend the unknowable Father directly, an act reserved only for Nos. This violation of the divine order, the law of syzygy, results in a flawed, formless offspring. So, some in Gnostic beliefs might say that Sophia is our god of the material world because she is the one that created the demiurge. And in that way, that's how, some people may debate the possibility that God could be a woman or androgynous or male or whatever. Now, in most Sethian and Valentinian texts, the offspring is Yaldabaoth, also known as the Demiurge. Horrified by this abortion, I hope YouTube doesn't get upset with us for that word, Sophia casts it out of the pleroma, veiling it in a cloud. Ignorant of its mother and the higher spiritual realms, the Demiurge believes it is the sole god. So it doesn't even know about the higher realms. It truly believes that it is the one and only God. And it says as such. It proceeds to create the material universe and the archons to populate it, trapping sparks of divine light, human souls, that's us, within matter, that's this physical body. So weak. Look, see? I can pop my bones just like that. This body is weak, man. Weak. I'm telling you all, I truly believe that upon death, what we call death, what we perceive to be so, I really believe we gain a lot more power and a lot more freedom. But the problem is, you have to just wait. You just got to wait around and you'll get there eventually. But you can't, Anyways, while Sethian texts often portray the demiurge as malicious, Valentinians frequently depict him as merely ignorant, a tool Sophia eventually uses to shape matter into an image of the pleroma. Now there is a divergence, and that's what we just talked about. But to summarize, the difference between the two is Valentinian and Sethian. The Valentinian system has 30 aeons in strict syzygies, while the Sethian system only has 13 aeons, or variable, and focuses on a triadic structure. The primary emanation in the Valentinian system is Bethos, depth, and Sigi, silence. And in the Sethian system is the invisible spirit Barbello, the mother father. Now the view of the demiurge. In the Valentinian system, often ignorant but redeemable, a learning process of sorts. Now the Sethian system, and looking through this, I'm going to tell you right now, I personally am more aligned with the Sethian system in my own beliefs. But, anyways, not trying to preach. I apologize. Just explaining the differences. Hostile, arrogant, and evil. A lion faced serpent. Basically, he is the Gnostic version of the devil. Salvation focus. In the Valentinian system, they believe in restoration of harmony, Christ as the unifier. That he was sent to unify all people, and we can actually become harmonized with the demiurge. Now, in the Sethian system, they believe that was an escape or jailbreak, and Christ as the revealer of secrets. So they believe in the Sethian system, they believe that Jesus was sent here because he was able to escape from where he was previously. That's a whole rabbit hole we are not going down right now. No, we are not going down that rabbit hole. But basically, the short version is he was able to escape, and when he escaped from his prison, he came down and started telling all the humans the truth. He started telling them that that was a false god. He literally told the Romans, in the Bible, it literally says, and Jesus said to the Romans, "You do not know that of which you worship." He was straight up telling them they were worshiping a false god. And the Romans were like, hey, that's not cool. So in the Sethian system, we believe that the demiurge, aka God, whatever you want to call him, Yaldabaoth, we believe that he did send Jesus here, but we also believe that Jesus was able to escape from him, and that's how he got here. and that the Romans were basically ordered to get rid of Jesus, not to, pay for our sins or anything like that. In the Sethian system, they believe that Jesus was basically just executed for revealing too much truth too quickly. And it's interesting because if you read through some of the scripture, some of the stuff that Jesus talks about is incredibly alchemical. Like water to wine, that sounds like straight up alchemy to me, bro. Just saying. Now, in the Valentinian system, their key texts are the Gospel of Truth and Tripartite Tractate. In the Sethian system, their key texts are the Apocryphon of John and Hypostasis of the Archons. The only one I've read is the Nag Hammadi, so I don't know which area that would be considered to be a part of. And the last part we're going to talk about tonight, to end it off, the Aeons are not merely static beings, they are believed to be active agents in the process of salvation. Because the material world is a result of deficiency and ignorance, humans cannot save themselves through works or faith alone. Instead, they require gnosis of their true origin, knowledge of where they came from. Thank you, Elric. I will never forget you. Intermediaries. The Aeons bridge the gap between the transcendent God and the flawed material realm. They project their influence downward to awaken the divine spark within select humans known as the pneumatics. Okay, this is. I feel it. Okay. The limit, Horos. In Valentinian myth, an Aeon named Horos, limit, is emitted to separate the pleroma from the lower chaos, protecting the divine fullness while allowing for the eventual restoration of Sophia. Ooh, this one is fun. Christ as an Aeon. In these systems, Christ is often viewed as a unique Aeon or a convergence of all Aeons sent to teach humanity. By imparting gnosis, Christ enables the soul to ascend past the archons, reunite with the syzygy, and re-enter the pleroma, completing the cycle of emanation and return. That is the one I like. That is the interpretation that is my personal favorite. And I don't want to say too much, but I definitely feel a connection with one of the intermediaries. I may have spoken to one of the intermediaries until we lost contact. Definitely feels like some of the stuff he was trying to teach me. But that's our episode for tonight. I hope you all had fun. Thank you for hanging out, and we will see you next time. As always, stay uncanny and always do your own research, double check things, and never let us tell you what to think. Make up your own mind. Thank you, and we will see you next time.